And welcome aboard, folks. Steve Malzberg with you, and I'm so happy to be joined by a man you've read in the Wall Street Journal for many years. You've heard him as a commentator on Fox, and he's also the senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, as senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and the author of a new book, False Black Power. And the answer, I think, is yes. We welcome in Jason L. Riley. Hi, Jason. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
It's been a while. It's great to talk to you again. So I guess the premise of the book is that despite promises from those on the left, like the NAACP and other groups and black, quote-unquote, civil rights leaders, the Sharptons, the Jacksons, that through political means, change is going to come to the black community. It's not to say no change has come and no success has been had, but the change that I think most people would desire and expected hasn't really happened. They're kind of disappointed, and it's been a failure, that this route, because this political route has come at the expense, as you write, of other means, such as changes in the community, change in values, and other issues, correct?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Since the 1960s, the civil rights leadership has put in place a strategy of heavily emphasizing the election of more black officials. The thinking has been if we can put more blacks in elected office, the socioeconomic gains will flow naturally from that. That black prosperity will flow naturally from black political power. And I thought the Obama presidency was really the culmination of this strategy. It's what black leaders had been working toward for decades. And so after his election and after his presidency, I thought it was a good time to look back and say, well, has this strategy been working or not? And I don't think it has been working very well, and I don't think we should have really expected it to work very well, because Obama was really, there were a lot of black elected officials before Obama. They weren't president, but they were mayors, they were governors, they were congressmen, they were school superintendents and police chiefs in major cities around the country with large black populations: Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, D.C., Atlanta. And from that experience, we should have learned that, or it should have tempered our expectations as to what black political leadership could do. Because in many of those cases, in Marion Barry's D.C. or Andrew Young's Atlanta or Coleman Young's Detroit, the black poor were worse off, Steve, not better off. And so we saw this pattern again in many cases with the Obama presidency, where racial gaps in home ownership and income and poverty all widened under Obama. So I don't think this strategy of focusing on electing more blacks has been particularly effective.
So then, if that's not the answer, then what is the answer?
I think blacks should get back to focusing on what they were focusing on before this shift in strategy. In the first half of the 20th century, coming out of slavery through Reconstruction and Jim Crow, the emphasis was on building human capital, on developing culturally, education, evolving and developing the right habits and attitudes and behaviors and values that other groups in America had developed on their rise from poverty to prosperity. And that's what blacks were focused on in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And when they were focused on that, we saw racial gaps closing in this country: gaps in income, gaps in home ownership, gaps in employment, gaps in blacks entering the skilled white-collar professions. Slow but steady progress was being made. And in the second half of the 20th century, when black leadership shifted to this political strategy, we saw those trends slow, stall, and even reverse course. And so we talk a lot today, or the black left does, or the left in general, about the legacy of slavery or the legacy of Jim Crow, explaining these racial gaps, this racial inequality today. I think we would do better to be talking about the legacy of the Great Society, the legacy of the huge expansion of the welfare state. I think that much better explains what we see going on today.
Well, okay, there's so much in this world that we're never going to go back to. Well, let me ask you this. Education, again, culturally, yes, I agree. But what always has bothered me, and this is, we're talking about blacks now, but I could point to Jews and ask why do they vote for this one all the time or that one all the time and Democrat all the time. It drives me nuts. So why do blacks in the inner cities who are in this constant, you know, I mean, Donald Trump got a lot of heat for portraying the inner cities the way he portrayed them. But we only have to look around. We only have to look. I mean, look at Chicago. For crying out loud, wouldn't you think the residents of Chicago would be begging for an alternative, begging for the other party, no matter who it is, because the status quo is unacceptable? Why is that not the case?
Well, a couple reasons are going on. I think there are a couple reasons that explain that. One is I don't think the Republican Party has done a particularly effective job at black outreach. They don't go and campaign in these areas. They don't run ads on black radio stations or during television shows that blacks watch. You need to go introduce yourself. You need to go to the barbershops. You need to go to the grocery stores in these communities. You need to go introduce yourself. And giving a talk at the NAACP convention every 4 years is not black outreach. In fact, I think if Republicans really want to be effective, they need to go around that black leadership and talk to the black rank and file, everyday blacks, because the NAACP and the Jesse Jacksons and Al Sharptons, I don't think are really speaking for everyday blacks. So I think one part is the lack of Republican outreach. The other problem going on here is I think that the left has done a very good job of convincing a lot of blacks that government is good for them, and the more government, the better. And that's what they do. You know, we're the government. We represent big government, and we will solve your problems, and your problems are not your fault. They've done a very good job of perpetuating this victim mentality, which is another big difference from the way blacks thought in the first half of the 20th century and today. I think the mindset is completely different today as well. But the Democrats have done a very good job of exploiting that. So I think it's a combination of one party really only courting this vote and then bringing a particular message that has a very easy appeal. And no one really responding to that message in terms of going to these communities and giving them an alternative message.
What happens when Maxine Waters says horrific and vulgar things about Ben Carson, or when Clarence Thomas is called an Uncle Tom, and when blacks attack conservative blacks as not down for the cause, or whatever the case may be? What does that do to everything that you're talking about? How much harder does it make everything?
I think maybe at the margins. I don't think Maxine Waters is. People who consider her a spokesman for blacks, I think, are pretty. I don't know how representative they are of Black America. I just don't know how relevant her message is to the average person out there. So I don't know that it does a great deal of harm. But I don't think the rhetoric is helpful. I don't think it's constructive. But she's a politician first, and that's part of the problem, and that's what I'm getting at in the book. That when blacks turn to politicians, it's a very inefficient way to go. The Maxine Waters out there, the Barack Obamas out there, are going to be looking out for their political interests, and their political interests don't always align perfectly with the needs of the black underclass. So Obama gets in office and immediately tries to shut down a school voucher program in Washington, D.C., and another one in Louisiana, even though school vouchers and school choice are extremely popular in the black community, pull off the charts, have for decades. Yet he gets in office and tries to shut them down. Why? Not because they don't work or aren't popular among blacks, but because he's got to do the bidding of the teachers' union. He's a politician now. The teachers' unions helped him get elected. There are very powerful special interest groups. And he's going to do their bidding instead of the bidding of the people he supposedly represents, racial and ethnic minorities.
So one more, Jason, how optimistic or not are you that this is going to turn around?
Right now, I'm not particularly optimistic. I hope I'm wrong, but I see developments out there that give me pause. I think the Black Lives Matter movement is particularly disturbing development that we've seen in recent years, this racial identity politics, this focusing on color consciousness, sort of turning Dr. King's ideas on their head. King says, look at me treat me or judge me by the content of my character, not the color of my skin. Now we have Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. And I don't think this ends well. I think King had it right. This racial identity politics out there, the black nationalism, we've been here before. Some of your viewers and listeners may remember the 60s and the Black Power movement. It doesn't end well. And I'm afraid that we are going to have to relearn that lesson in this country, and it could get ugly before it gets better.
Well, let's hope you're wrong on that front, but I fear that you are correct. And Jason, I hope everybody picks up False Black Power by Jason Riley. And sir, thank you. A pleasure and honor to speak to you again.
Thank you, Steve. Take care.
All right, Jason Riley, folks, and I want to thank all of you. Until next time, make sure you stay informed by checking out newsmaxtv.com and, of course, the website newsmax.com.